going to start now. It's about 5 past, and so I've given us the 5 minutes to let us all get here. My name is Marc Chardon. I'm the general manager of what's known as business development for the Productivity and Business Services Division. That's a lot of words that can have a lot of different meanings, so if you don't mind, I'll take a couple seconds to answer the first question you might have, which is, who is this guy and why is he here talking to people who actually know something about computers when he doesn't? He's just demonstrated that by having to rebuild his machine in front of half of the audience. I was actually the field GM up until about less than a year ago in June. I was the GM of Microsoft France. So I'm a marketing and a strategy person, not a technical person. I don't even play a technical person on TV, although one of the longest-standing techies here was my roommate in college, a guy named Mark Spikowski, and so I think he's like employee number 4 at this point. So actually, the bad news is that we were in college together, and he got hired, and I didn't get noticed because I wasn't techie, I guess. But it was a lot of fun to actually catch back up with Microsoft 3 years ago. I was the GM of digital in France, so I come from an enterprise computing company. I come from a company where you ask the question, when the line gets cut between the ATM and the mainframe while you're in the middle of a transaction, what happens doesn't cause fear, which it does in companies like Microsoft, which started from the computer client server back for most of the people who do technology. So I have an understanding of what customers try to do with technology. I've been doing that for the past 15 or 20 years. And when Dean and I were talking about technology transfer and what Microsoft Research could do to help the Office business and what I could do to help give you context about the Office business so that you could understand what might be implications of the work that you're doing for the future of our corporation, it reminded me of some wonderful times that I had doing cooperation with the Digital Research Organization, which was a very, very important part of how we did advanced development as an enterprise platform company. In fact, many of the people that we have today that I actually know who have been involved with the research organization, i.e., it's a small number, but the high percentage, are people that I knew at Digital, people like Jim Gray, who got to Tandem and then went through Digital, and people like Dave Wecker, who spent some time here at Research, who was also a person with whom I did a lot of work at Digital. And I have a real high appreciation for what research work can do in the creation of ideas that can go into advanced development. And so if I have one objective for today that I think both Dean and I share, it's that you walk away with one idea of one area that's important about the future of Office that you might not have known, and understand just that one thing about how your work could help us in the year 2010 continue to have the kind of position as a company that we have today in the personal productivity space. That's my one objective, and I need your help to help me get there, because I can sit and talk for an hour and a half. I'm a field guy. That will not be productive, I promise you. In fact, there may not be very many people left if that's what I do by the end of the hour and a half. So I need your help. This is a lot of slides that I have. I can stop. I can reorder them. And it's much more important to understand what you'd like to hear and what questions you have than for me to get through the presentation. Okay? So is that a deal? Can we like... Okay. I mean, I actually am looking. Okay, so in preparing for this, Dean and I sort of brainstormed, and my thoughts were you'd like to walk away knowing a little bit about, something about the history of Office, because some of you may not have spent a lot of time on that, and the crisis that we're facing, because there is a crisis. What we're doing right now to redefine the market or to understand where we could provide value that would help us address that crisis. You might be wondering what kind of strategies are we putting into that redefinition, and what is the dream that we might have about Office. And then wonder what might be the center of value creation for Office in the year 2010. And then my objective, the last one might be yours as well, where do we need help and what can Microsoft Research do? Does that sound like a reasonable list of questions at this point? Are there others that I've missed that you'd like to have me address during the talk? Hey, Dean. Seems like you know your audience. Okay. If you look back at Office and you say to yourself, how did it happen that we ended up with 95% of the computers in the world that use personal productivity software running our software. You have to go back and take a look. You guys are going to find it a little hard to see because I promise I'll be in the way, and there is room over here. And I don't mind if people sort of move over to where they can actually see the screen. We did a couple things that some of our competitors forgot to do. You remember? We were behind Lotus in spreadsheets, for example. They just forgot to bet on the graphic user interface. It was a big mistake. We bet on putting applications together and that people would buy for a little bit under twice the price of an individual app, a suite of applications. In that context, we took something that was, for example, something called PowerPoint, which we bought in fact, which, if you will remember, was actually a tool that you used to not use genographics to create 35mm slides. Right? That was what people did with PowerPoint or Harvard Graphics at the time, and created a whole new category, which was presentation graphics in real time. In fact, we're using it today. PowerPoint was not created for what we're doing. PowerPoint was created so that people could create 35mm slides. Right? So there is a really strong, if you take those three things, Lotus screwed it up. They missed the graphic user interface. We figured out that people would really like to have it all together integrated and are willing to pay more than 1x, less than 2x for 3 or 4 applications together, but that would actually increase not only market share but the overall penetration, and that once people got pieces of software that they'd find out how to use it in ways that we didn't know that or intend. Pretty simple in the rearview mirror. It was not simple when the team actually did it. We then plugged in a little piece of software called Outlook, which now actually is the most used part of Office. And it just sort of rode on the back. Exchange was not really taking off, as you'll recall. We were having a real toe-to-toe, head-to-head with a lot of vendors, including my old company, All-in-One, and including Lotus's Mail, and including IBM's Mail. But all of a sudden, Outlook was in there. And Outlook now is, as I said, the #1 place people spend minutes in Office. And we made a big bet that content authoring would be a real category. And as you'll see a little bit later in the data, that was a great bet. 300 million people use Office. About half of them pay for it. And it's different place by place. U.S., probably 25% piracy. In Vietnam, probably 99% piracy. So it really varies. So you'll see, for example, there are more employees in Europe than there are in the United States, but there are half as many paid licenses of Office. But there's all of Eastern Europe, which is at piracy at 80+%. Right? So it's an $8 billion business, and the problem is that it's an $8 billion business that will stay an $8 billion business unless we do something dramatically different. But the results of making that decision to put suites in play around in FY97 is that we've gone and just had humongous growth, while the proportion of the standalone applications, the orange part, have stayed pretty much the same. We also added a version that had incremental components for not so much more price, the Pro version. It's varied over the years, but it's always had something plus in addition to the base value. And the mix went up to sort of half pretty quickly once we had that, and it stayed pretty steady at roughly half. So it's about half of the people who buy Office buy a version that has some added application or other in it that provides them with some incremental value and provides us with incremental margin. The challenges we face today is that when now this is me going back to being the GM of France. This is a sales guy. I'm standing in front of the Bank of France, or I'm standing in front of France Telecom, or I'm standing in front of the SNCF, the National Railroad, and the CIO says to me, my people are happy with Windows 95 and Office 95. I mean, they can type, they can write letters, they can send mail. Why would I want to upgrade? We haven't really been able to get the end users to really do something totally new. Like PowerPoint allowed something totally new. Outlook allowed something totally new. Unfortunately, today, we haven't told people or gotten people to believe that smart tags or task panes are going to let them do something totally new. No? There we are. CIOs are just under pressure. They spent a lot of money to get to the year 2000. Get over the year 2000. In Europe, a lot of money to get to the euro. And their CEOs are saying, look me right here in the eyes and tell me what you've done for me lately because you're spending a lot of money. So they're just saying, I'm locking down the desktops. I want ease of management. I want everybody with the same desktop. I don't want to have to deal with all this stuff. I want software that just works. We don't provide that today. And so Office is perceived as expensive relative to the PC. If I say to a customer, are you seriously telling me that Office is not worth to you in productivity 1 franc per hour per user, i.e. 16 cents per hour per user? That's about as much as heating or electricity. It's less than the amortized value of a back chair. Right? Are you seriously telling me that it's not worth that? There is not a customer in creation who will tell you no. On the other hand, they'll just simply say that, but it's expensive compared to the PC, and there are 50,000 people using it, $72 a year. And so my CEO is looking at me and saying, cut money, so just reduce your price. Yes, it is definitely worth it, but you don't have any costs. It's bits, so simply reduce your price. We're too profitable, right? So obviously means that we should be able to reduce our price. But anyway, that happens a lot. People are coasting on the enterprise agreements. They aren't even doing the version upgrades anymore. There's a lot of piracy, as I mentioned. And so Office is projected to significantly lag industry growth.
What do you mean by coasting?
Coasting, I'm sorry. Coasting means you stay on a previous version rather than sort of maintain the version upgrade sort of cycle. We used to sometimes do things like change formats. CIOs hated that. Sales reps loved it. But part of our trustworthiness and our reputation comes from forcing people to upgrade because of the network effects of a change in standard. So we haven't done that for the last couple of versions, and so we've allowed people to coast on 95 or on 97.
What's SORG?
So I'm sorry, small orgs. That's one of our horrible acronyms. It means small business. So there's SORG, MORG, LORG, small orgs, medium orgs, large orgs. We do that so that we can't actually compare ourselves to anybody in the field and actually understand what data really means. I'm sorry. These are one of the things I really hate because I don't understand. If if I'm a medium enterprise customer and I think of myself as mid-market, I wish that Microsoft would call me, say, well, you believe you're a mid-market enterprise that's trying to become a large enterprise. Why don't we just call them that, right? But we sometimes forget to try to put ourselves in customers' terms. And that's part of what I think you can help us do. Going once? Going twice? Okay. This is the counterpart to that previous nice, beautiful growth slide. This one says that other than a little upblip when we launched Office XP, we've had some real serious declines in our growth rate. That happens when you get saturation. Most PCs have, many of the world's PCs, if not most, have Office on it already. And you get coasting and non-version upgrade. You get this kind of result because you can't really grow much faster than the PC market grows. Unless our own biggest competitor is our pirated installed base and our previous versions. And so that means that we're probably looking at less than 5% growth rate for the Office business, which is on the order of $8 billion out of our $30 or so billion of revenue. And so if we're shooting for a 15% overall revenue growth, the rest of the company has to grow like gangbusters, or we have to figure out a new game. That's sort of the end of the history and the problem sort of block here. Do you get a real sense of what we're facing as a company now? If we stay in our core productivity segments, there's 24 billion of sort of productivity software being sold about now, and we've got about $10 billion of it when you add it all up through all the different channels. If we stay in our categories, we are going to be in the segment that grows at 7% a year, and we will go from, say, 10 to, say, 13 billion over the next 4 years, for which I have data. And the rest of the market will go from 14 to 44, growing at 30-some-odd%. We'll get in a bit to see what's behind those two, the two different color blocks there. But that means that we participate in 9% of the growth over the next 3 or 4 years. 9% of the growth. That means we go from being over 40% of the market to being under a quarter of the market in a 4-year period for productivity software. That's the punchline, the bottom line. That's the challenge. That's the crisis. So Jack Welch says, when you have high market share, redefine your market as a bigger opportunity where you have lower share. right? If we define ourselves as document authoring and creation, and we're 90% of that market because we're a great company and produce great products, and we say that market's growing at 5 or 6%, we can't leave that. We can't let that be. We have to redefine it. And so this is what it's about. We've decided now we need to spend some time redefining the market. When you look at the CEOs of the world, the people to whom we actually sell this stuff, and you ask them these questions, what's the advances will have the greatest impact on your productivity or your results of your company, success of your business in the next 5 years, and you give them these kinds of options, they choose knowledge worker productivity as their number one concern. You know, this idea of how do you get knowledge and intellectual property and process and figure out how to make it into corporate assets, it's been pretty trendy for a while, but the results aren't there. It's sort of like artificial intelligence. You know, we're going to have it right around the corner. We've been having it right around the corner since about 1964, right? And so this knowledge worker productivity thing is sort of in a similar spot. And so that's the good news is that if we get something right, there are people who really, really, really want to buy it. And they're willing to spend a lot of money to buy it. I was sitting with Citibank. They came in, and I sat down with Citibank the other day, and we had a great conversation. This is just one little example. But there's an investment banker sitting at the table, the head of all the investment bankers, in fact, at Citi, and he handles 100 accounts. He's a sales rep as well as being the head of the bank. He can only probably handle 10 of them really well and personally. But he said to me, you know, Mark, if I could have audio recognition on the CNBC channel that just simply sort of listened and indexed, and any of the names of my companies came up, it took the 30 seconds before and after of CNBC, put it into an MPEG, and sent it to me, that would be nirvana. Because then I could just like send a mail off to the person saying, wow, I just saw that you were interested in such and such so-and-so. You know, do you need some investment banking help? And it would do two things. It would make people feel more important as his customer, and it would give him opportunities he otherwise wouldn't know. Now, that's actually theoretically quite possible. I mean, you know, you don't have to be perfect at doing voice recognition to index CNBC moderately well, and the risks of missing something in that case is zero. And the upside of actually getting, you know, Canadian Pacific right and having the clip show up on the guy's desktop is that he thinks Microsoft walks on water. So there's some real good stuff about knowledge worker productivity that's sitting in your hands that people like the head of the investment bank at the world's #1 bank would really love to see in reality, not in theory.
I would guess everything goes in CNBC comes first via Reuters or Bloomberg, where it's ASCII text files. Why not grab it at the ASCII text file stage?
I asked him that. He said because CNBC is what everybody watches. You know? So, now the knowledge worker spends their day. Here's an office research, an office diary study on quite a few people. I think it's about 3,000 people, as I recall. And this is where the office users, you know, there's 12% executives in this population and 11% middle managers and so on and so forth around. That's the population that was reviewed. When they say square pegs, it's just like they didn't fit into any of these other round holes. I don't know why they chose that topic. But they spend their day doing document creation all the way down to 1.2% of their time note-taking, or their time on office, not the time in the whole day. Now, we're creating something called Scribbler, in fact, which is about note-taking. And this means that they spend 5 minutes a day, because there are 2 hours of office use a day, and 1.2% is actually, of 2 hours is probably even less than that. It's probably about 2 minutes a day doing note-taking. So we're going to try to sell Scribbler for maybe $200, $300 because they spend 2 minutes a day note-taking. That's actually sort of right. What's really right is that you say, well, no, in problem solving and some of document creation and in meetings and on the phone, there are real opportunities to create value by allowing you to take notes in a much better way on a piece of paper rather than on a piece of paper, but to repurpose notes, to take notes, use them, and repurpose them, put them in the system.
You mentioned earlier that Outlook is #1 used Office app in terms of time, yet document creation outstrips email by, what, a factor of 3? What's up with that?
Well, so the question was, I think I should repeat because I believe we're being taped. So the question was, you said Outlook was the #1 used application, yet in this taxonomy, document creation is the #1 percentage. What's up with that? The answer is most documents by most people are created in Outlook. So you may be using the word editor, you may be using a text editor, but you think you're using Outlook.
So it's kind of a
And-
coding issue in a sense.
Oh, absolutely, it's a coding issue. This is self-reported. So people think they're creating a document when they're creating mail, but they're also, sometimes they're reading mail, and often they're reading it in Outlook. So this isn't actually, this is about how the PIM is in Outlook, the Personal Information Manager is in Outlook, email is there, and so there's a bunch of stuff that happens in Outlook, and so we didn't say what piece of software, I mean, there's probably some other portion of the thing, actually, we said what piece of software were you using at the time, but we really wanted to understand from people's perspective what did they think they were doing. And we've cut this a number of different ways, because that's sort of interesting, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing Scribbler, it just means that we're thinking about how you make note-taking a more powerful and useful thing in electronic infrastructure, and I'll get back to that. But then what you do is you take those little blocks of things like analyzing and drawing and authoring and whatever, and you start to map small and emerging companies. And this is one of the things Dean asked me to do, is explain how we do a market mapping, or how we try to identify how the market looks like, where it's going to go, and where opportunities might be. One of the best ways is by looking at smaller emerging companies and say, where are they putting stakes in the ground? Because they usually put stakes in the ground where Microsoft isn't, or between our organizational boundaries, because they know that we'll fight between the organizations for some period of time while they create markets. And that's a real honest-to-God strategy. A VC will simply say, is this between Microsoft spaces or in Microsoft space? That's part of the sniff test, right? So we basically say there's some authoring, some leveraging, some communication, some managing, and some employee services. And there are sectors inside of there that are defined by the market, by the people who are buying, and by small companies who are emerging. And then we go into IDC and we say, can you massage your data in ways that help us to evaluate what these markets look like? And when you go back to the Office user segmentation and you recategorize all those activities in those 5 big buckets, you find that authoring and creating content stays at about 21, but that communicating, interacting, and leveraging content become bigger parts of the day. People spend more time communicating and more time trying to use what they've created than they do creating the information. And that's, as a sales rep or a marketing manager or whatever, that's subjectively, true. And it seems to be objectively true when you do the data in the study. And then you take the same thing and you then start coding it by saying, what's the current focus of Microsoft? Green. What areas are really the growth areas? Orange. You get a much more in-depth, much more textured view of what I pointed out earlier, where we are simply very strong in the areas that are not growing fast. Everything that's in green in this chart, with the exception of drawing and project management, is at a growth rate. Sorry, everything in green in this chart, when you add them all together first, is at a growth rate of about 7%, going down to 5%. There are some examples, exceptions: 14% project management, 29% for email and scheduling, and 19% for drawing as categories. But even there, the specialty people are growing a lot faster than the generic or horizontal people. So Visio is growing slower than the specialty drawing competitors, for example. And the areas that are growing at 26, 32, 46, 40, 32, 32, 76 are all about communication and leveraging content. They all require servers or peer-to-peer. And they're not about personal productivity standalone on an individual PC. Content management is not about you managing your own content on your own PC. This is not Alta Vista Search Personal Edition, right? This is about how do you manage content in an environment to make knowledge available across an organization. BI and analytics is not about how one person in a quarter figures something out. It's about how every sales rep understands the impact of the whole organization on their account, or how every territory manager understands what's happening in their territory. Portals is not about an individual. It's about sharing of information. Finding information is cross-organizational. Delivering content is delivering to somebody else. This is about figuring out how to use knowledge, and it is simply not a one company, one product, one group in your corner figuring it out problem anymore. So this is what we need. We've decided at the first pass through this mapping, we decided we need to focus really on this leveraging area, and that there are some emerging opportunities in the taking of notes and electronic meetings. The RingCam idea actually sort of sparked a lot of thinking about that. What would happen if you could get the meeting information in early? You could index it. People could use it more effectively after the meeting, and so on and so forth. And then there's a focus on client management, which is a very fast-growing part on sort of the applications, and bridges from this productivity opportunity map to another one, which is about the similar size, 20-plus billion going to 50-so billion, which is business applications. It includes things like CRM, so cluster client relationship management, supply chain management, enterprise resource management, those kinds of applications. Now, interesting enough, when you look at our competitors, in our areas, the 95%, where we're 95%, there aren't whole large, our main competitors are following Sun Tzu. They're not going and attacking our fortified cities. They're out there taking all the areas where fertility is happening. So you look at Adobe or Yahoo or Oracle or Yahoo, Sun, America Online, they're present in all of those fast-growing areas.
What does content management entail exactly?
What does content management entail? Well, it entails the ability to put, to catalog, structure, and deliver content in ways that allow people who are not the creator of the content to get to it. Portals can be access to a content management infrastructure. And if we go back to, I'll see if I can get back to it, the first slide, the best way of understanding what it is by looking at, who the competitors are. So people like OpenText or Documentum. They're people who really think about how do you actually catalog, manage, archive, keep available pieces of content, and then purpose them or repurpose them in ways that allow a corporation to understand and capitalize is the word I'm looking for on the intellectual property content that's been created. And to get beyond that, I'm happy to identify people who are experts in telling you what that box is, because I'm more expert in trying to figure out the market side of it and less expert in figuring out what the actual people did to cause those set of things that I know customers want to occur. But Dean and I can put anybody who has a specific sort of feature and functionality. There's just this huge process map that has 270 document flows inside of an organization that was done by Norm Judah and Anderson. And we've looked at the document flows, and we've tried to catalog which kinds of document flows fit into which of these processes, as well as which of the business applications processes. And it's actually very, very convoluted and involved. But the advantage is that once you've decided that you're going to attack one of these segments, you have an idea of what actual document flows and document types are being moved. And so you have some concept of what the spec would actually have to look like if you were actually going to develop a product that fit in these spaces. And I'm not an expert on the content space, so I will stop with that.
One of the observations I have is, like, if you look at BI, most of the companies you have, Office is the front end for BI, and Excel is the the heaviest used BI tool. What you're showing there are back end servers.
Well, actually, that's an interesting question. I will beg to differ with you. What I'm showing with you there are people who have partnered with companies who do BI in a way that we don't know. So BI is a perfect example of where companies identified a spot. We believe what you said. We believe that Excel is a BI tool. Business intelligence. Analytics, analyzing business information in order to make decisions. So when you try to understand which geography has the best sales and which stores are most impactful for what product lines with which salespeople, being able to analyze all those dimensions and make business decisions about where you invest, where you put new stores, that's an example of what one might do with BI business intelligence. But we believe, and you're absolutely right, that Excel is the most used BI tool. It's actually probably no longer true. What happened was that companies like SAS and Cognos and Hyperion decided that Excel was much too difficult for the average user to use in doing analytical BI. And so they created a whole market segment which we didn't know existed called end-user query and analysis. And end-user query and analysis is a $2 billion market that these people created right between, it's not in this segment, but there's a segment over here which is about server platforms, and there's SQL and OLAP cubes. So we have, databases and OLAP cubes and connectors, ETL, extraction technology, so you get it from the big database into the data warehouses and data warehouses. And we have over here, we have Excel and because people have Excel, we think that people use it as a BI tool. And these other companies in the middle created two categories that are about end-user query and reporting. And they knew that because the SQL team and the Office team were two different organizations, that they'd have several years to create the market. And they did. So we own the fact that that market exists and we're not present in it. Because we let it happen. Just like we let Siebel become the CRM. And we had Outlook. We had every single sales rep in the world practically using our contact manager. We let Siebel create Salesforce automation and then CRM, client relationship management, because we didn't actually connect the bits and pieces of our organization as fast as a competitor could drive a truck between our organizational boundaries. So I'm sorry, did that address the... So what this people do is they have partners, they're really good partners with people like Hyperion or Cognos. And Oracle actually builds really great BI presentation applications, which actual normal human beings, not OLAP gurus, can actually sit down and use in order to create decisions out of data. I'll just sort of go across here. Dean?
I just wanted to mention that we actually have now responded to that. So there is an end-user business intelligence tool that will be shipping in Office.
It is shipping.
.net.
It is shipping.
Well, we have one shipping now. They're working on some new stuff. David Heckerman met with them.
So we went and bought a company called Maximal in order to create Data Analyzer because we wanted to at least be present in that segment. Because it is criminal for us to have left this thing become a $2 billion business without our presence when we own 95% of this and we own 30% of the data warehouse business. OLAP business. Likewise for CRM. I was going to go there.
Tablet PC. Over there it seems to be the case that taking notes and integrating with the rest of the Office is pretty critical. What is happening there?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
The tablet PC.
Tablet PC. I will. Can you hold that question? Because I'll get back to the tablet PC along the way.
All right.
But the tablet PC is a wonderful example of how a discontinuity in technology can change the whole market and create areas that are outside of the incrementalist view of the world. And I will get back to that.
Isn't one of the, I haven't spent a lot of time in the training side where we realize that the software component of training represents the smallest piece of the pie. So for every $5 of total training, $1 to $2 was in the software.
Yeah.
Doesn't that also apply to a couple of these other areas? I mean, I remember Microsoft helped give birth to these CRM companies, but one of the problems was, one of the reasons why it wasn't practical for Microsoft to get into that space was the service side. And a lot of these things require pretty in-depth service plays where the total value might actually be higher on the service than on the technology.
Right, so the question is basically, a lot of these areas seem to be places where the total bill to the customer is large and the percentage of the bill that's software is relatively small, and then it might be services or other things that are built into the bill, and those could be reasons why we haven't approached some of the segments. And the answer is that's absolutely true, which is one of the reasons why the company created the internally known Sable, externally known integrated solution selling process a couple of years back, a year and a half back, and and is starting to move into an enterprise solution selling model. I will get back to that in about 3 slides. It is also clear that we do not strategically intend to become IBM Global Services, so we need to have a different partnering strategy than somebody like IBM who really wants to actually get those other dollars by doing the services themselves. That's why we would invest in a joint venture with Anderson to create a 50-50 owned subsidiary that does Microsoft services, for example, that's a reason why we're doing the solution selling, and it's also a reason why the part of the strategy that you'll see in, I think, 3 slides has been taken the way it is. The other part, though, is, and it's a little bit more subtle, but is probably more important for the conversation that we have here, is that some of these companies have figured out how to take what was services and turn it into software. Now, we are, let's make no mistake about it, a software company. Our intention is to remain a software company. And so when Siebel, for example, bought, what were they called? OnTarget. OnTarget was the #1 company for doing Salesforce process training. They bought OnTarget, and they said, okay, guys, you don't do training anymore. You're going to design software that delivers the intellectual property content of your training. That's what they did when they bought OnTarget. And then all of a sudden, the people that we were using to train our sales force, in fact, in the field, when we implemented Siebel, became intellectual property content that they could sell at 0 incremental cost per bit. That's awfully cool. So that's one of the interesting, really interesting sort of second-order strategies that may be the first-order result.
Maybe I'm nitpicking, but when you say Anderson, do you mean Accenture or do you mean the go-to-jail company?
You're right, absolutely. You are not nitpicking, and I was imprecise. I meant Accenture and our joint venture Avanade. And so Accenture, which was the Anderson consulting company that did computer implementation, which became Accenture, and then the joint venture 50-50 with Accenture is Avanade, and Microsoft is called Avanade. Thank you. It's one of the wonderful things about working with people who are smarter than you are. So we've looked at it from a market sort of, new company up perspective. There's one other way of looking at the same set of data and the same challenge before you get to the strategy of how you address it. And that is, and you could choose any sort of model that you want for how a knowledge worker sort of cycles through their work. This is one that Jeff happened to have presented to the board back in November. So since he's my boss, and since it seemed like it was at least a moderately explanatory way of looking at a person's day, we can talk to it this way. Not because he's my boss, but because when you think about the whole context of a cycle, there are very few companies who could actually pretend to try. Pretend is the wrong word. I'm sorry. I'm French, and I sometimes use French words in English as if they were. Pretend means to aspire. There are not many companies that could aspire to doing a whole circuit of this loop, right? Just the resources, the sheer amount of resources and research necessary to create some sort of an integrated view of how you would do all of knowledge work, not just authoring, not just collaboration. And so there is a potential play for this such kind of company that we are, which would really differentiate us, which would be to figure out what's the platform or the infrastructure upon which these various different things plug in order to make something happen from the total that wouldn't have happened from the individual sum of the parts. There are examples in recent history of where other companies have done that successfully. Siebel took the ideas of Salesforce automation and the ties back to the enterprise platform and the tie out to the customer and created a category called customer relationship management, which is sort of a superset of all of that. Another one of those that's happening right now is what's called professional services automation. It's a combination of project management, human resource management where the resources are not interchangeable, i.e. separate skilled people like software engineers or consultants, and about accounting and billing and client management and putting that all into one sort of integrated structure. So when you can put in integrated structures that actually take you large ways around whatever your particular arbitrary definition is of a knowledge worker's work value cycle, you can actually create superset categories that short-circuit that whole map that I just showed you. Because you've created a new set of value by linking the pieces together and not having to do the rekeying, the coordination in ways that are not process-oriented and specified by the corporation. If you re-break that same set of data about office users down under those categories, you find that the authoring category stays roughly the same, but you can look at the amount of focus that's spent on decision-making, hence the importance of BI early in the process, communication, hence the importance of something like Outlook, the collaboration, hence the rise of the portal strategies, access, content management, search, and so on. Absorbing is, I'm always surprised that reading is 2.8%. That one really gets to me. It means that we're sort of like reacting on what happens as opposed to actually trying to absorb the data, which is sort of fascinating. And then other being administration and managing of your own infrastructure, which would be nice to reduce.
I'm wondering if you could dramatically shrink the author category if you had better communication and collaboration.
So the question is, could you dramatically shrink, or wondering if one could dramatically shrink the authoring category if we had better communications? Certainly we have competitors who would like to think that. And since we're like 90-some-odd% of authoring, if somebody shrinks authoring to profit of something else, let's hope it's us.
Mm-hmm. Well, we should, because there's nobody absorbing it.
Well, that's true, but it's nobody absorbing it. But authoring can also be part, can be part of the input to collaboration, and it can be part of the input to decision making. And so, what I take from this is that people don't spend a lot of time reflecting, but they spend a lot of time deciding, collaborating, but not necessarily just sitting down trying to work through it. And in fact, if I look at my calendar, you all have a really great luxury that we need people like you to spend time reflecting so that you can actually then do your work in a context of purposeful decisions. That's at least my fantasy about what happens in research. But that doesn't seem to be what happens when you're in the field. You get your sales quota that comes down to you. You react. You decide. You look at where your investments are working. You redirect your marketing investments. And you don't spend a whole lot of time reading, Crossing the Chasm.
What is the role for workflow products?
What is the role for workflow products? Boy, I wish I knew. That's one thing that would love to have somebody help me understand better. Because there are two kinds. In companies, there seem to be two kinds. I won't do that. In companies, there seem to be two kinds of process, or three, depending on how you break it down. There's process the company cares so much that they instantiate in policy or in software, SAP, Siebel. As a sales rep, you have to do it the Siebel way, or as a purchasing agent, you have to do it the SAP way, because the company's cared so much about the process and the result that they've just simply made it that way. The same is true of paper policies. And then at the other end, there are things that are so ad hoc that no one will ever get to, it's like, the mail that you sent to somebody because you had this little idea. I was talking with Kartik the other day about, could we possibly create a CD-ROM that would allow you to test Office and Windows without actually reconfiguring your existing PC? There's no workflow process that will ever capture that particular thought and that particular conversation. And then in between, there are these processes which maybe we can instantiate in some sort of semi-structured workflow. And my hypothesis, which I think we'll get to in the last slide as well, my hypothesis would be that if we could help people do semi-structured workflow in a real simple and intuitive way, that we could potentially really help people with that cycle. But I wish I knew the answer to exactly how or what. If I did, then I'd be building that company probably, rather than standing here trying to convince you to help Microsoft build that company. So here are the early directions. Sort of when you take a look at all that stuff and you say, what's come out of all that thinking, all that work, all that time, all that analysis, we bought a bunch of companies and we made some investment decisions. In the portal space, we kept SharePoint Portal Server as a separate product rather than let it just simply flow into Windows and Office, because we convinced ourselves by doing that work that portals were a sustainable value category, and that we could probably charge and create value that was worth $25 an exchange user for portals and we could add value into that category faster than Windows and Office would have to turn it into commodity infrastructure. Was that clear what I just said? And so the challenge when you create a category on top of Office is, do you think that over a period of time you can add value into the category faster than the infrastructure turns it into commodity? And we forgot that little step, for example, with HTML and browsers. We know how to add value faster than it turns into infrastructure. We just forgot to have a monetization mechanism there. And it was a good strategic decision for other reasons, but it's not an example of what we're trying to do. The question is, how do you create categories where you can add sustainable value above the advance of the front edge of the infrastructure upon which it resides? Content management, we made an acquisition that has become the Microsoft Content Management Server. We're figuring out how that and search and portals all work together over time. I know there's some research being done on how you make search better and more natural language and more intuitive. That's a hugely important problem. We sat down with that same Citibank group, and one of the things that they really care about is how do they get more self-service into their relationships with their organizations. And self-service means how do you identify what people are asking for and reconfigure yourself in an automatic way so that you answer the questions with fewer clicks and in a quicker time frame. CRM, we've made the decision to not buy in that category. We have enough assets, and the integration of something from the external and the problems of what do you do with the Unix part of their business and so on and so forth would make it actually slower to buy somebody than to actually finish the work that we've started. And so there will be a CRM product of our own making on the market by the end of the calendar year. Meetings, presentations. Again, this is mostly an internal. There's a huge amount of work in things like Messenger and Scribbler and meeting servers and Windows Media and so on And then in the BI space, we acquired Maximal, as I said earlier, which was data end-user data query analysis. If you've not used what now is known as Microsoft Data Analyzer or taken a look at, that shows you why it's not Excel and why it's not OLAP cubes. And that's an area. And then we've also got a BI plan. Now, I will come right back, so you don't have to, your hand doesn't have to turn white. The BI plan in Office, BI was one of those areas, again, where it was between lots of different organizations. So it was very hard for us to create a strategy and very easy for a new company to create a strategy. We now have a leadership group of the BI people across the organization. We have a single plan that encompasses all of the work that they're doing, and I believe covers the market map that approaches, that is the BI segment and where the BI segment's going. So there's a combination of acquisition and internal development that will be happening there. That's quite exciting.
What's RTC?
Real-time communication is RTC. Oh, I'm sorry.
What is digital meetings server?
What are digital meetings? I don't know. I was hoping you'd tell me what digital meetings are. Digital meetings would be using software to make meetings more productive in some way. And so it's a very vague concept. And I'm not sure what digital meeting server actually does myself. So I would, but there are 2 or 3 things about meetings that I know from the user's perspective that people are frustrated about. They are frustrated about going to meetings when they don't know what it's about. They're frustrated about having to miss a meeting and not being able to get the key aspects of what happened at the meeting. They're frustrated about not being able to use technology to facilitate some portions of meetings. And so those are 3 areas that digital, when I think of digital meetings, come immediately to mind. And I'm sure that you all can think of lots more.
I think it's related to net meeting, and you need something to host the distributed meeting.
The one hypothesis is that digital meeting server is related to net meetings, and you need something to host the distributed meeting. That's another area. There are some companies out there who do that as well, like companies like WebEx and so on. But my guess is that if we will not compete with a startup head-to-head on one little segment, we have to figure out something that's a more integrated solution to what people mean when when a customer says, what's a digital meeting? And then, if I knew the answer to that, I'd have a much better way of addressing that. Because we, as a company, have the capability of linking 2 or 3 things together. A ring cam, an infrastructure, an agenda annotation tool with Scribbler on everybody's PC in a collaborative way. So when people take notes, the notes actually are there and repurposed into meeting minutes. Is that good or bad? I don't know, but I know that it would be harder for anybody else to do that than for us. And when I look at something that we could do, I try always to ask myself, what is our uniqueness and how can we sustain a differentiation compared to a competitor? So that's sort of the end of the what did the market look like and what's the today looking forward version of things. And so we have to do something really important. This is where you talked version upgrades. That was the VUPS in the earlier VUP version upgrade. We have to break out of the cycle of having to try to get everybody in the universe to upgrade to the next version of Office, or our business falls apart. And we have to figure, which caused us to have to try to turn every single piece of intellectual property that we created into the next version of Office so that we could hopefully get everybody to upgrade, because we were no longer going to do it by causing document format changes or by whatever. No, but that's what people, and I'm not talking as a Microsoft person there, I'm talking as a customer now, telling you what I would be saying in that situation. It's like, you changed this on us, therefore we were forced to migrate. As opposed, so we have to somehow figure out how to get out of that, because in that cycle, the only rational thing to do with a new idea is put it in the next version of Office. If you don't have a way of taking value and deciding whether you put it into Office to keep people happy with the existing platform, and having a mechanism that really creates new categories that you can really monetize and grow, if this mechanism doesn't exist, the only rational thing to do is to put all the value in Office or Windows and go for the upgrade. Because you're tying yourself to the PC market and you're hoping that you can upgrade and anti-pirate enough to sustain your growth. So we have, at this point, decided to create a robust way of taking a new category idea and turning it into a real growing business independent of the platform. That implies you have to figure out what's the appropriate amount of investment to put into Office Because now over half of our customers pay this on a periodic basis, either through an enterprise agreement or through something called software assurance, which is sort of a maintenance agreement where you get the upgrade value, you pay for it over time rather than paying for it all at once. So the question is not anymore how do you get people to upgrade, but what makes people happy, delighted to spend $72 a year per seat for Office? That's that 16 cents per hour, right? What makes people happy to spend that money? And it may be a different answer than what would get people to upgrade to the next version. And so we have to start thinking differently about what you put into the next version of Office and how you create value over time in the context of Office. And it's about trustworthiness and secure computing, and it's about a whole bunch of different things, not just new features. Because people don't use most of the new features. It may be about helping people understand which new features. Go back to Citibank. A person who receives a claim so a Citibank employee who receives from a customer a claim or a question about a loan, it takes 20 minutes for the customer service person to access all the different bases and information necessary to assemble the letter that they send back. When Columbia Sportswear receives a customer email, the order number is a smart tag. You right-click on the smart tag, you say Answer Customer, and all of that work that the Citibank person does manually is done in under 15 seconds. And an email shows up with the status of the order, with the UPS tracking number, with where it is in the UPS cycle, with da-da-da, right down the list. And it's all there. And you just have to delete the paragraphs you don't want to send if you don't want to send them, or you can just simply click Send. And what was a 20-minute exercise turned into a 20-second exercise. Now, that's not taking seconds out of the day. That's not taking minutes out of the day. That's taking hours out of a person's day. And now, if you could only find one idea like that per customer per year, the trouble is it's not the same idea per customer, I understand. But if you could, people might be happy paying $72 a year just because you're helping them find that. Right? So, I mean, our challenge now is to figure out how you put more than $72 of value to the customer every year for the $72 they're paying, whether or not they upgrade. And then the second one is, how do we, when we create a new category, how do we keep from killing it because we can't sell it? When was the last time the company created a $200 million category from scratch? We bought Visio. That doesn't count. Bought Project. Bought PowerPoint. I don't mind if we buy it, if we can build it and grow it. But when was the last time we really did a good job of that? And we did a great job with Outlook. That was sort of drafted with Office, and you don't really know what percentage of it's Outlook and what percentage of Office. We did it with Exchange. We did it with RDB. SQL. Relation database, sorry, SQL. We need to learn how to do it much more reliably. It says SharePoint Portal Server is growing a lot more slowly than we'd like. It's doing okay. It's growing well, but we should do better. We should have a better field infrastructure. Because our field infrastructure really got turned to selling enterprise agreements and selling Office and Windows. Windows and Office, Office and Windows. And so we're building right now a field infrastructure to help us to take new categories and sell them as independent categories. Once you've identified places where you can add value faster than Office and Windows, we'll commoditize the bottom of the value. So there's there's a potential of creating some sort of a second suite. It allows you to build solutions as well. And so we're taking these platforms and saying, what are the services that you need to wrap around it in order to have people actually buy what they want, which is end-to-end. So there are solutions around Six Sigma. There are solutions around BI. There are solutions around integration of healthcare platforms. There's a number of solutions, and there are more in the pipe. We're thinking about every year, how do you create 2, 3, 4 new solutions areas, and what's the sales structure necessary, the marketing structure necessary, the field infrastructure and partner structure necessary to create solution categories and not just product categories. We obviously need the server infrastructure because, remember, every one of those fast-growing segments is a segment that ties the client to a server or a peer-to-peer platform, hence interest in things like Groove versus, what does Groove mean versus what does the server version of the world mean. And then over time, we need how to figure out how to differentiate Office for the home user and for the small business user because, in some ways, it's sort of odd. We make them pay more than a large customer for Office because of the discounts, when in fact, in some ways, they probably take less value from it than from a large customer. So how do you package and structure it in a way that actually aligns the value of what they get and the parts of what they get to the value that they can actually take out of it? So those are the challenges of today's business strategy. Does that seem moderately clear? One question here.
Like one of the real contradictions, it's just a hard problem to get over, is the value of network effects. Like scheduling meetings was something that really Microsoft, you could argue that Microsoft had a huge role in the growth of electronic scheduling of meetings. I mean, most organizations don't think about doing that. But it only works when everyone has the product. The same thing with PowerPoint. A new way of doing presentations, the network effects of having this be something that everybody's doing is hard to then at the same time try and find these niche markets which could undermine your ability to have some of these network effects.
So the question or comment is that network effects make this an even harder problem because there are two network effects. There's the user network effect, which is to say that when 2 people use scheduling, it's less impressive than when 2,000 people use scheduling, which is less impressive than when 2 million people use scheduling. And by the time 20 million people use scheduling, it's very hard to enter that market. And so that's why a company like Microsoft, which has traditionally been a fantastic fast follower and has gotten into markets that have been broken open by small companies and then just simply outperformed those companies, today, you have to ask yourself whether we can just exist on being a fast follower. Our conclusion as a leadership team of PBS is the answer is no. We need to incubate categories where we're the innovator and not the fast follower, because otherwise we will fail at obtaining some of these network effects early on. The second network effect, which is not less obvious but certainly is impactful, is that once you have a size, you have the ability to invest in research that simply snowballs yourself. Advanced development. I didn't mean research in that case specifically. You actually have the ability to invest in advanced development and a bunch of other stuff, but it's specifically the advanced development and trying to get out ahead of the next versions of product and not just focus on V today and V today plus 1, but saying, well, what's V today plus 2 look like, and how do I invest in making sure that we are ahead of the, I think it was Bobby Orr who said, skate to where the puck is, not to where, where the puck's going to be, not to where the puck is. We need to always be thinking about how to skate there. And when you get to be the biggest gorilla, you get to invest in doing that more than other people do. So the network effect is doubly insidious. There's about the people using it, and there's about the resources necessary to maintain it because of the kinds of margins and the essentially zero cost of goods once you've created the product. There's a follow-up? Yeah.
So since you mentioned crossing the chasm, and then you just said that Microsoft wants to be an innovator in new categories. Well, innovating in new categories almost by definition means service and providing everything. You can't just provide the software without, when you're moving into a new space that may require a lot of vertical and custom development, to legitimize that space and then branch out of it. How do you rationalize?
The question is, or there's a hypothesis that you need services to innovate into a new space. I actually don't agree with that hypothesis. I think that there are examples where that's true. I know that there are other examples where that's not true today. Companies like WebEx, for example, don't have a service infrastructure, but they do host digital meetings. Is that innovation, not innovation? Getting into the argument about what constitutes innovation is a challenge. But most of the companies that a venture capitalist sees are very small and don't have any service infrastructure, and that's we don't usually see the idea until it's in round 3, and we need to have the ability to say no. Take 5 people, go in a corner, come back in 6 months, and tell me if you can commercialize RingCam. Or that's an example, but it's like I don't know what you need, but I don't even know we don't even technologically find out if we can do something before we build the business plan. We have these wonderful ideas that sit there. And then we're not sure that we, in the businesses, have receptors for evaluating the idea, let alone, getting to the step of understanding whether there's service or not in there. Back there and then over.
Just one comment on, I'm not sure I would call point 3, advanced knowledge worker scenarios, service for advanced knowledge worker scenarios. I'm wondering if that doesn't give people the wrong mindset.
Well, you're right. So the question is, I'm not sure we'd call this advanced knowledge worker scenarios. that's true that that's totally an internal thought. It's about how you segment the value of Windows, and it's not about how you'd present it to the market. It's like saying, what is Windows by itself? Is it Windows by itself an operating system, or is it a knowledge worker platform, or is it a development platform? Because if you try to do all of those things at once, you fall into a terrible pricing problem. And so you have to decide what is the core value. The core value of Windows has been file and print serving. That's what we beat to get the franchise. And now the question is, do we leave it at file and print serving? And then if it's some sort of a basic Windows knowledge worker server, what are the quote-unquote advanced functions? And there could be a different or better word, but it's meant to differentiate it from whatever is part of standard Windows. That you can create a sustainable category as a server category, just like we're talking about SPS.
Yeah, okay, I get that. I guess what I'm also saying is, it comes across as, okay, let's focus on the client first, and then worry about the hard problems later, which is, integration with the Microsoft, servers, whether that's Exchange, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at competitors like IBM, there is definitely a risk that more and more value will migrate to the server, right? And so I just wouldn't want people to have the mindset of...
Certainly as a digital guy, I don't believe that, it's sort of like it's not a small matter of programming what the infrastructure does. Mm-hmm. But it's not, IBM called it a small matter of programming. This was like 30 years ago. It was like, no, it's just a small matter of programming. We'll solve that for you, Mr. Customer. And then you sold 3 or 4 technical people in your contract for the machine, and you did the programming for a year or 2, and then it didn't work, but the machine was already there. But it's actually... You're only partly right there, because they may not even exist. If the peer-to-peer people are right, there may not be much of a server there, or the server may be very different. And even if we got all of we are 62% of the software industry's profit. Okay, I mean, even if we got all of it, it doesn't. There are limits to growth here, and so the challenge is more the challenge we were talking about earlier of how do you take services and non-software processes and convert them into software value. And we'll get into that in just a minute, and so I should probably forge on. But the real challenge is not how do you beat out number 32 for the next $1 million of profit. We're $9 billion of the profit of the $16 billion that there is. I mean, and the next 5, who are going to be hard to unseat, are the next $5 billion. I mean, Oracle and Computer Associates and SAP, and I forget one, Siebel, I think, actually, and IBM. Well, IBM actually wasn't in there because we did. So I'm actually lying, because it's 62% of the independent software people who can actually view the actual. So IBM clearly has, but I'm not sure what profit they make at it. It's an interesting question, but they definitely have revenue that doesn't count in that, because I can't go and figure that out. So I will rephrase myself: 62% of the independent software industry's profit is in Microsoft's pocket. And the bottom of the top 200, the bottom 100 actually make negative profit by a lot. There are a few who make money, but most of them don't. So I will move on from this. I'm sorry, there was a question there.
Just a small question, which is that what makes you hopeful about the document management business? Because we are quite far behind, in my opinion. Compared to Verity.
I am in no way an expert on document management, so I won't even attempt to answer that. I know we bought something, and I know we're going to think about it, but I have not seen the plan, so I won't comment.
Can we articulate what is the benefit to the customer if they buy this? Is it better customer service, more customer service?
Which this?
This strategy, this whole second suite, and the knowledge worker marketing service, sales force. If they buy this package, this next thing of all.
Yeah, what is the value to the customer if they buy this? The general answer is that there's not one specific value, otherwise you wouldn't have separate categories. What we need to do is a much better job of actually articulating that in the decision to make a separate category or to make a solution. And part of what my team as a business development team does is to help develop the templates and processes for finding out whether there is a specific customer value. But it really changes a lot about this chart. I would like to, however, abandon this chart in the interest of time and the last part of the presentation and move on to, I'm going to just go right by it, $20 billion, sorry, we'll get there maybe. Sorry. We had a Jack Welch quote earlier on, which was, about redefining markets. But Jack's fifth rule of his six rules that happened before this recent book with Redefining the Market. So this is Jack's rules 20 years ago. Jack's fifth rule was change before you have to. And so we've been talking about changing because we have to. And we've been talking about going from 2002 towards the future, and we've been doing it in a sort of an incrementalist way, the conversation we've had so far. And we sort of know how to do that. I mean, you identify where companies are. You decide how to fast follow them or to innovate ahead of them. You can create processes about that. What I'd like to spend the last 20 minutes about, what I'd like to challenge you as the research part of the organization to think about, is let's imagine we're in 2010 and we won. And then we can say to ourselves, what did we have to achieve to have gotten there? And those are the things I'd like us to think about right now. So it's, we won because we created authoring tools in the 80s. We made a suite into them and made communication in the 90s. And we got a bunch of theories about what it is in the 2000s, in the aughts, that are going to make us differentiated. And I'm not sure which of those things are going to win, whether it's XML, whether it's convergence, whether it's ubiquity, whether it's paperless. It's sort of like what Gandhi said about Western civilization. When asked what he thought of Western civilization, he said, I think would be a good idea. Well, that's like the paperless office. I think it'd be a great idea. That's why they call it the paperless office of the future, right? It's because we're not in the future yet. And so I don't know which of these things are going to help us win, but if we can think about what it is that the world would really look like, or have some hypotheses about what 2010 looks like, we may get some clues about which of these things will have helped us along the way. And the problem is that we've just spent a lot of time talking about what we know how to do as a company, which is to grow the O workers, the office workers. I'm going to create a whole bunch of new categories here that are totally sort of absurd, which is to offer software for new kinds of work outside the 2 hours a day that the typical office user uses Office. That's one thing we can do. We talked about that. That's incrementalist. That's one thing we will do. The second is to increase usage among the casual users to sort of get them actually more involved. Those are the things we've talked about. That's evolution. The revolutionary question is, how do you attract new users to categories who don't actually use it at all? I mean, Office users is only 300 million out of 6 billion people. Right? I mean, the big one would be getting 5% of the rest. Because we only got 5%. So we can either spend all our time trying to make that oval a little bit bigger, or we can start asking ourselves the question, well, what about all the people who use information? Use it, create it, write it down, capture it. Today, most of it happens on paper, on whiteboards, in conversation, on phones, on Raspberries, whatever. Most of it doesn't happen in Office, actually, it turns out, much to our surprise. And and then there are a bunch of people who are they're separate people. Part of these iWorkers are PDA users, and some of them overlap with Office, and some of them don't. Part of them are e-workers. I'm just making these all up, okay? There's no official definitions, and if there's anything wrong with them, it's all my fault. People who use electronic infrastructure for their work. And then there's this sort of weird idea, it's like the knowledge worker. The problem with the knowledge worker category, it's the creation of intellectual property, but it covers all of these different markets, and so it's very hard to say which part of the knowledge worker you're actually trying to address on any given day. There are professors who don't actually even use any electronic infrastructure. A doctor or a nurse working on a clipboard with a patient is actually not even a knowledge worker. They're just simply a technician. Working in a clinical trial, they become a knowledge worker because they're creating content. The software engineer who's using, SendMail and a Unix platform is clearly not an Office user. You go around the UPS person, you sign on that little special purpose appliance. There's definitely an e-worker, iWorker. They're not an Office user, and they're not a PDA user because it's not a general purpose device. And I didn't even put the C worker, which is the cell phone worker, and whatever. We could do a real cool alphabet soup here and probably find one for each of the 26 letters, and we probably have to go to Greek and Cyrillic so we could get more. And the problem is when you look at all of that, you can say to yourself, we sit in here, and who is it who said, where you stand depends on where you sit? We sit in here, so we view the world sort of through this lens of this big yellow oval, and what I would love to find out is what would bring these people into the fold.
Am I missing? I don't see a home worker.
That's H worker. I got it. The next click brings the H. Oh, I'm sorry. They are I workers, but you're right. There's also the question of I livers as opposed to I workers, or and that's one of the things that I will get to in my challenges to you, which is there's a question about the I worker is also a dad or a mom or a student or whatever, and you don't necessarily distinguish your roles. Just your cell phone didn't change when you went home and when I go home and become a dad and no longer I'm a GM of business development for a few minutes. That's a really and so yes, this is totally conceptual, and so we do need to have the H worker. I will add the H worker and the C worker, and if we can come up with other ones. And so the real challenge is, let's do the solar eclipse on Office and say to ourselves, if you were a venture company, a venture-backed company, and you were choosing a place in here to attack, would you go right in the middle of that big black hole? And the answer is no. I mean, people who succeed don't. They go somewhere around the big black hole. And they go and they figure something out that is not the 2 hours a day that people spend on Office, the people in the Oval spend on Office. They attack the 6 hours that they don't spend on Office, or much more likely, they attack the people who don't have Office, and oftentimes they attack the people who don't have Office at all. So the real challenge is which of these people, when, how, why, and that's a real hard problem. That's what's known as white space analysis. It's white space because there's not even any color in there. It's about figuring out where you think the puck is going and skating there. And small companies do that. Most of them fail. And the ones that succeed are the ones we remember. And so here are a few hypotheses that when I look at what I see from research and from advanced development and from our engineering, if I tried to re-engineer an implicit or latent strategy for Microsoft from everything that I see, this is some of the things that I would believe would be our strategies for addressing the non-Office space. There's something about getting things in a digital form early and once. Every customer complains about rekeying, inaccuracy, human error. And so things like XDocs, so getting things into XML forms and formats easily and simply, things like having a tablet, which sociologically is different. You're a sales rep. You don't open a laptop between you and your customer. If you're a sales rep and you put a tablet on the table and start writing on it, not only would you do that because you're not creating a sociological barrier between you and your customer, you're creating an aha experience where the customer's going to say, wow, I'd like to see, how does that work? And then all of a sudden you can be showing them how cool it is, and all of a sudden you've got an excited customer again. It's a lot easier to surf on a technological discontinuity than it is to try to slog through the trenches of getting 3% more market share in an area where there's no discontinuity. So digitize once and early in the process. And I use a couple examples. There should have been a dot, an ellipsis at the end of it, but it made it line wrap and it wasn't pretty, so I didn't have time. But there are other things that do that too. I mean, for example, Halifax, which is in the Vaskovitz organization, which is an idea about how do you help the purchasing agent have a view of all of the things related to a specific supplier or a specific order. That's also about getting things into that view quicker, earlier in the process. So there are hypotheses about that. The second one is there's a bunch of things about putting e-work into that worker's context. It's like when you're a knowledge worker or an e-worker, you usually are working in the context of something, and you have to reconstruct the context yourself. So imagine you're doing, I'm a manager, I'm doing reviews. Then all of a sudden, my free work time is over, and I have a meeting. Well, all those review things, I either leave them in some sort of in my bar, start menu bar, or I close them all. If I close them all, I have to go back and open all those different things. I have to find the website where the salaries were on. I have to open up the review model. I have to find everybody's review forms. I have to, right? Now, the context of Juggler, which is in there, is, you have a second start button, and you click on that second start button, and it says reviews, because that's what you named that context when you were. You click on reviews, and then all of those things come back exactly as they were when you were working. That's not a minutes a day thing. That's a minutes a month thing. That's an hours a month thing. The amount of time you spend reconstructing your context. But this is true about almost any kind of e-worker. Insurance adjusters have claims. Lawyers have cases. project managers and people have projects or teams or tasks. You have a task orientation or a specific customer orientation. You have that insurance investment banker I was talking about, 100 customers. If that person could have the context show up exactly as he was working on his last customer, each time whenever he goes to a specific customer, he says, I want to talk about Microsoft. I want to talk about Intel. I want to talk about, and then the context they were in and that context comes up. Those are the kinds of things that could be really powerful. And then there's the question that came up earlier about these aren't really e-workers only, they're also people. So maybe that juggler thing allows you to simply say, I'm working, I'm not working. It changes your real-time communication, your presence. It changes your phone list. It changes what your Bluetooth tablet does when your phone answers. Because when it's a customer, you want it to bring up the customer record. When it's your husband or wife, you want it to just ring, right? You presumably don't need to have the bio of your spouse show up on your machine. Or if you do, I actually have been one or two people who, well, never mind, I won't go there. There's something about making ad hoc workflow work. Like, for instance, if I'm sitting there with my scribbler pad and I'm writing notes during a meeting, how many times do you write a document that really only has one purpose? Hardly ever, especially when you're taking notes. Like, if I could just circle the part of the document that's related to Kartik, and then another part that's related to Dean, and another part that's related to my admin, and I could drag a Post-it onto it, a Post-it that says delegate. And it automatically gives me, I put the name in, and then I write this little handwritten note, and it goes off, and it's tracked in my delegation mechanism. It's digital right managed, so you know what document it came from. You know that it's the actual same document, but you didn't send your whole document because, there's notes in there that you didn't want these other people to see, just that part you circled. Those kinds of things. There are dozens of time management systems out there. And what you really want is we know how you use money, and it says, well, I can configure myself to look like Quicken to help you get into me. I have money. You want this system to say, well, I'm the 7 habits of highly effective people, or I'm David Allen's getting things done, or I'm. You want that kind of situation where people, how they work is just automatically sort of instantiated in their system. That would be, I'd pay $400, $500 for a piece of software that did that one thing, that just simply made my system more David Allen than the way the system is when I configure it the way I use it today. It would definitely be worth $400 to do that for me today. And I know there are lots of people for whom that is true. Not necessarily David Allen, but whatever their actual working system is. And then the final one is, it's bringing the right software to the right device to turn I-workers into E-workers in our previous taxonomy. It's like, well, what would it take to have that nurse or that doctor who's in the hospital have an electronic, chart at the end of the bed rather than that paper chart? How many errors happen? And I was driving to work, was yesterday. And what state was it? I can't remember which state. So it's on NPR, and they are testing doctors on handwriting. And doctors whose handwriting fails the test go to remedial handwriting schools now because the hospitals don't want the liability of a miswritten prescription. Can you imagine these guys? I mean, these men and women, these doctors, they've been doctors they're 40, 50 years old. And, there's this, they're going to go sit down with this retired first grade teacher who teaches handwriting. Right? Now there's there's a monkey in there. There's something in there that there's a perfect example of that I worker really needs, an E-infrastructure because we have a risk, lawsuits that are happening. No, I'll be right back. One of the pieces of, I remember the first voice recognition, when Dragon was doing voice recognition early on, the thing that they sold wasn't really the general purpose one. The versions that sold well, like with Visio, where you use the enterprise version, sells 3 times, which does the network mapping and has a connector to the Active Directory, sells for 3 times the price of standard Visio. The versions of Dragon that sold were the legal version and the medical version. And the medical version was you're an emergency room doctor, and it required you to answer all the questions that would keep you out of court. And that was why hospitals bought it. Because, it said, well, did you check for whiplash? osculated the thing, fifth murder, brain, mash, dum, bam, and it knew all those words. Bang, 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 bang. And it had no problem recognizing all those words because they're all Latin and there are not many of them. And it just went down the list of things that an emergency room person. So the person had this little headset and they were or this handset and they were dictating into it and the screen would pop up, bang, bang, bang. They didn't have to type, didn't have to get their hands dirty, didn't have to mess up their gloves, and they did. So those are the kinds of things about how do you bring the right software to the right device at the right time to make I workers into e-workers.
We have a reluctance to get into some of these vertical markets because to take the doctor's case at point, it doesn't seem to be a huge technical issue. It's a matter of the right form factor. If you are willing to build vertical solutions, you can do it with just today's technology. I mean, there is still an issue of display.
That's a good comment or observation that we're not typically an industry or vertical solution company. It's not likely that we are going to become one in the near future. But it is likely that we may choose one or two verticals in any given area to be proof of concept and build platforms that work. And when you do the proof of concept, you might as well do them in the big sectors, right? I mean, so if you're going to do a vertical for ERM, you might as well do retail, as opposed to do, I don't know, doctor training schools, nursing academies. Because there are just a whole lot more retail establishments, and so the business is bigger. But the answer is you're right. We probably won't be doing a whole lot of vertical. We really do like to be clear, and we need to be more trustworthy in the effort of the trustworthiness campaign about saying where we will play and where we won't play, and leaving real opportunities for companies to put vertical value on top of our platforms. We've actually gotten away from doing that well over the years. We've been unclear about where we went and played, so people played and gamed that one because the only safe thing to do was identify safe places because we wouldn't be able to get there, not safe places because we said that we wish that they were there. And we need to get back to being the company that when we say, we are going to do retail, but we're not going to do wholesale distribution, that people believe us, and then they invest in software and wholesale distribution on top of our platform. And that's part of my challenge and our team's challenge to get there. So my challenge, and I think the reason why Dean asked me to come and spend this time with you today, my challenge to you is to sort of start to work on what your hypotheses are about what is the 2010 center of value for an iWorker or an eWorker who's not an Office user and who's probably a mom or a dad or a student or a whatever for part of the day and probably has different kinds of devices than just a desktop PC and probably, would like to do a number of the things that we see on here, but which I don't know how to turn into tangible scenarios of what the world might look like in 2010 and what technological discontinuities that might imply that we could surf on and what opportunities along the way might arise as we evolve the capability, as Moore's Law allows you to do more with the infrastructure that we have, basically. And so with that, unless there's a final comment that you might want to add in, Dean, have I done my job here? Okay, I've done my job. And then I want to thank you very much for your time. I know that sitting down for an hour and a half and sort of doing this kind of thing can be both energizing as well as it's an investment. I appreciate your time and effort. I really do look forward to hearing from you directly or from Dean. I'm M. Chardon, M-C-H-A-R-D-O-N, either directly from you or from Dean. The ideas that might come up over time, because this is what will make or break the company. The question of whether or not we can create the next franchise, whether it's Office or one beside Office, that is the next $10 billion franchise, is what will make us win or lose in a .NET services world. And it's not just taking the existing one. It's got to be something where we step out of the box. And there's nobody better than to think that than people who sit in this room, along with the rest of the company, help challenge us, because you have the opportunity to do a little bit more of that than the 2.8% of the thinking and absorbing. And we need that, because the rest of us who are just sitting there trying to get the next version of Office out don't get to do that as much as maybe we like. And we certainly need the synergy with you and your ideas. So thank you very much for your time, attention, and your thoughts.
Got feel for this doctor with a clipboard. When did your computer last go out to lunch and lose a session of work and reboot it?
Exactly right. That's one of the key issues is the trustworthy computing issue.